sacrifice of the martyrs, all the martyrs of the church, many of whom, most of whose names we'll never know. The church knows them, and many of them are recorded, but we could spend the rest of our life learning them. We'd never learn them all. These are people who know what it means to live their faith, and people who know what it means to have to replace their earthly hopes with heavenly hopes. And they've all been pushed through a moment of real crisis where they've had to make the decision. Not to choose earthly hopes, which is very difficult. I have a lot of earthly hopes, and I'm sure everybody does. And I often think, what if I'll never get to see this happen? Whatever thing it is that I'm looking forward to in the next couple of years. What if I die before thus and such? I think that way a lot, actually, because I can feel just the beginnings of my body falling apart, and I wonder what will happen, how much time I have, and everything. But the martyrs, they had a different situation. They didn't have to wonder how much time they had left, and in fact, by their choice, was revealed to them the end of their days, which is what one of the prayers of David is, or with the psalmist anyhow. And in that certainty, they were able to go forward knowing that all of the earthly hopes that they had were going to be gone, and replaced by knowing what God had in store for them. And the first thing that he had in store for them was the witness of his Son to all of their persecutors. We live in a time right now where people are often being betrayed by kinsfolk and friends and parents and brethren. Maybe not always for the sake of Christ, at least on the surface. But I've thought about this a good deal, and there's some people anyway can't wait for an excuse to get rid of the Christians in their lives. But since they have functioning brains for the most part, they can't quite bring themselves in a polite society to just excise the Christians from their lives for no reason, no good reason. So they wait for the first seemingly good reason that they can find to get rid of them. And it has not yet in this country, at least in a widespread sense, achieved a state of martyrdom for Christians. But there's people who are actively and very actively, vehemently moving in that direction, who would love that day to come, where they can attack Christians in the streets for no reason, with impunity. I don't actually see something like that happening in any kind of widespread sense, because I'm mostly an optimist about this country, but we just don't know. And as I've said before also, it could be the case that because of the size of the country, because of the disparate nature of the different social groups and the way the news cycle works, and we could well reach a point where, like so many other things, the martyrdom of Christians begins slowly and achieves a certain dull undercurrent within even this country, that people think oh, that's really sad, another Christian got killed by a street mob or something. Or who knows by whom or why. But such things happen. I mean, there's horrible crimes that happen all the time, shootings in schools and things like that. They gain huge press coverage. Just a handful of incidents in which a handful of, quote unquote, just a handful of people are killed, and people think, oh, one of those happened again. And they move on with their day. And that's the kind of pattern that unfortunately we've been prepared for and habituated to. And so it's not really it's not much of a stretch to imagine such a thing beginning to happen with churches or with individuals that are Christians. But none of that should scare us. It certainly shouldn't surprise us, because it's the pattern of the history of Christian life from the beginning of Christian life, from the beginning of the life of Christ. Persecution, marginalization, slight regard by and hostility from the authorities, the cultural leaders and such. It's never been otherwise, really. There were periods of time, of course, when there were large Orthodox empires. But even while those empires were in existence, there was violence within the empires, and Christians that didn't happen to be within those borders also didn't have a great time sometimes, especially when the Muslims got geared up. So there's never been a time when Christians were not being persecuted. And we should really count ourselves, I'm not going to say lucky, but blessed. Blessed by God to be able to be aware of these things and to live in a country where, for the moment, we have the expectation and the of safety, and that expectation is not has not been thwarted yet. But when we think of how blessed we are to be so safe and so free, we must not forget to thank God for it. We must not forget to... How many times in our lives have we been the 9 lepers that just kind of continued on down the road after having begged for healing and received it? Begged for a blessing, begged for any number of things and received them from the hand of God, from whom all good things come. And just carried on our merry way and not have, without a second thought, and not turned back to go and fall down on our face at his feet and thank him. And in spirit, at least, we must always remember that he's planted his cross in our heart, and that we always have the opportunity, therefore, to turn to it and embrace the feet of the cross and kiss the feet of the Lord in thought, in mind, in spirit, in all sincerity. We have that capability. He's given that to us, another great blessing that we have, where we don't have to feel any lack of an ability to say thank you to God. We know that he's a person. We know that he's a human being. We know what he looks like. We know through all of these icons and symbols that we have around us, we know we don't have to use a lot of our imagination. The church has given us all these things. Again, the hand of God has given us all these things. So we must not neglect thankfulness, at the very, very least, truly the very least. And for such a little bit, that thankfulness is so greatly rewarded. Again, just being thankful. I mean, the blessing of the 10th man, the Samaritan, to be remembered for all time as the one who didn't as the one who was who did the right thing to receive the words of the Lord. To him personally, and that through his action, all of us become instructed and admonished. But where are the 9? This is just it's the gap between our effort and the Lord's blessings is always way too large to comprehend. But here we have something that ought to properly put us in a state of awe and great reverence and love for our Lord. Just that he answers our prayers, that he heals us, that he gives us the things we ask for, that we need. And that when we thank him, he gives us even more. Just from thanking him. We haven't even asked for anything more, but we get more. Because the simple act of turning towards God and facing towards him, bowing yourself down at his feet, the simple act of saying thank you, communicating with the Lord, is itself that extra bit. Brings with it all of those extra blessings. Brings with it all of those extra blessings of his regard. So many times in the gospel, as I like to reflect and remind people, the gospel takes a moment to tell us that the Lord looked at somebody. So when we take the time to go and address ourselves to him and say thank you, be sure that he's looking at you and that he hears you and that he will bless you even more in return. That cannot but be a great thing for your life. The more it's a prayer. To thank God is a prayer to God. Any communication with him is improving your life, improving the state of your soul. And so you can't go wrong by thanking him all day long. So let's at least keep that in mind, no matter what else comes. And also remember that if we begin to be persecuted openly for the sake of Christ, to rejoice, to leap for joy, because we know that our reward will be great in heaven. And we'll have one more thing to thank him for, to address him and to thank him for, and to receive his glance and his admonition, which is always gentle and always exactly what we need, always in exactly the correct proportion, and never ever too heavy. We make ourselves heavy, but the Lord makes us light. So let us thank him for all those things, and thank him for the gift of his church and of his martyrs. Amen. The blessing of the Lord be upon you through his grace and love for mankind, always now and ever and unto the age of the age.